All right, hello everyone and welcome. This is Meet Your Delegate number 9. We're slightly out of order here, but it's okay. This is a very exciting one for the community. We have Hasu joining us, talking about his platform to be a recognized delegate here at MakerDAO. As usual, these will be pretty short meetings. We've allocated 30 minutes for a brief presentation and some Q&A afterwards. So please be respectful of that time. Try not to speak over one another, as this will be recorded on YouTube. If you're not comfortable asking your question, that's totally fine. Just drop it in chat and me or someone else will be happy to ask it for you. So I don't eat up too much time here. Let's go ahead and kick it over to Hasu and let you get started.
Thanks, Payton. Hi to everyone who's listening. Yeah, very brief slide. For those who don't know me, I've been in the crypto space for 4 years now. Generally been a researcher slash blogger slash investor. I tend to think on a very long time horizon, make my investments on that time horizon as well. Wrote a bunch of articles and research papers, mostly looking at things from an adversarial lens. I currently have a full-time job leading strategy at Flashbots. And I also do some research and co-investing with Paradigm, put out some stuff there, papers on AMMs, staking derivatives, and recently one on how to design NFT launches, so pretty wide spectrum. I co-host the Uncommon Core podcast with Suzu of 3 Arrows. And yeah, Maker has been one of my longest time holdings, kind of had a love/hate relationship with it for a few years, as I thought it's the foundational project of DeFi, but I was unhappy with some of the decisions that have been made over the years, such as focusing on the use of real-world assets and the vote against negative interest rates in favor of centralized collateral. So, but none of this has really turned me off from engaging with the project. So I think, yeah, I have a very respectful relationship with the Maker community. I love using DAI. Yeah, I just, at this point, I think I'm in a position to get engaged more, and I have hopefully some cool ideas for improving the project. Next slide, thanks. I think because I do have a full-time job, I want to be fully upfront sort of about the amount of resources that I can dedicate to the project. I want to focus mainly on 2 ideas, and at least initially. First is I think Maker has a very flat hierarchy. The core units and Maker MKR holders voting on every decision. I think that the delegate system is a step in the right direction, but I would like to explore a system of executive delegates, which would kind of resemble an executive team in a traditional company. But I would be very careful for them to be accountable to MKR holders and not create a class of privileged basically privileged managers or operators that have any kind of privileged information. It's really more a way of adding a little bit more strategic direction and long-term thinking and overseeing the work of the core units. Because I think what's mainly missing, or what I've been missing from Maker, is really sort of a unified long-term strategy and roadmap. I think we have seen a bunch of visions expressed for what Maker could do, and then they pass on the forum, such as the clean money vision, for example, but then nobody is really in charge of actually seeing it through and making sure that all core units adapt their roadmap to this vision and put it in action. And I think what's also missing, I think that there has been some hope that the delegates actually play this role, but I don't think so I have a tremendous respect for the work that the delegates have done so far, considering that very little has been done by Maker so far in terms of incentive alignment. I think that what the delegates are getting paid today is not really competitive in the market. I think I would try to experiment with attracting actual leadership talent with more of an executive salary slash incentives to align them with the project. Yeah, I think I would be very careful here though to always make sure that we don't create any regulatory attack vectors for Maker. So I think these are the two things that have to be balanced, adding a bit more strategic direction and oversight, accountable to MKR holders without creating any additional regulatory attack surfaces. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. The second, something I've been really passionate about in the last year is treasury management. I think this is, I've written an article about this with Monet Supply, who's also a Maker delegate that some of you might have read. I think that generally DAOs don't think properly about treasury management. I think that the treasuries they run tend to be too small, and because they view their native token as part of the treasury, which I think is a pretty grave mistake. I think we've seen why in Maker itself. Maker itself is actually a good example, because we already got into the situation where we had to mint MKR, which then led to the market selling off MKR in expectation of further dilution. And really the money that we were able to raise from equity at the time when we needed it most has destroyed 1.5 years of MKR buy and burn. And so I think you really cannot protect against capital shortfalls by minting more MKR. I think the time to sell MKR is when MKR is overvalued to what we think the fair value is. So what we really need, I think, is a holistic framework for making good treasury management decisions. And for that, I would like to see like us to explore the idea of creating a dedicated treasury management core unit. I have since learned that recently we have the new strategic finance core unit. Maybe there is a way to expand their responsibilities to include that. So this isn't something that I have looked into yet. So applying the framework that I wrote with Monet Supply, I think we would be I know this is a very controversial topic right now in Maker, whether the burn should continue, what's the right surplus buffer, etc. So my take generally on it is, but I would definitely leave this to dedicated CU. But I think if one applies really a holistic way of thinking about this, then I think the result almost has to be that paying dividends as a very early stage project that is growing more than 100% year over year historically, I think is a pretty big mistake. One could argue that MKR is undervalued to fair value. So I definitely personally see that, but I think any money that we can invest in growth today is probably has a much higher yield than money that we can pay ourselves in the form of dividends or buybacks. So I'm very much in favor of stopping the buybacks indefinitely for now, investing all the money in growth, and also greatly expanding our capital buffer, because as I said, I don't think we should rely on minting MKR in the case of a capital shortfall. I think Maker is actually pretty undercapitalized compared to traditional financial institutions. And for a project that prides itself on being more conservative, more decentralized, more robust, I think this is not how it should be. I think we probably, for 10 billion DAI outstanding, I think we probably want to at least have 500 million DAI, if not 1 billion, in the capital buffer, would be my thinking. Another thing, I think it would be very interesting to create a debt offering for Maker. So I think the flip side, basically, the opposite of an equity offering would be a debt offering. So when the rates the market offers us are this low, then I think this is a pretty interesting opportunity for Maker to actually borrow DAI from the market at a fixed duration, and then we can spend that, for example, on growth. So that's something that we could explore, that a dedicated Treasury CU could explore. I know I've said that I'm against issuing more MKR at the current prices, but I think that other projects have done really well partnering with, core strategic partners. So that's something that we could do as well, especially paired with expansion on other blockchains. Would be my thinking, or core protocols where we think it makes sense to really closely collaborate with them. Yeah. So in that case, we could issue some MKR and sell it below market in order to gain long-term strategic partners for Maker. Yeah, thanks. Next slide. Yeah, and then just a few other points. So my general position is that I'm against running Maker as a public utility. I know this has also been a long-term divide, and there are camps inside the Maker DAO favoring both positions. I'm personally very pro maximizing growth and future profits to MKR holders. So to me, this explicitly does not mean utilizing Ponzinomics to boost the MKR price in the short term, but rather make decisions that pay off over a 10 to 20 year time horizon. So if it pays off earlier, that's great, but that's not the kind of decisions that I like to make. For the same reason, I'm not convinced of the clean money vision. I think that what the world really needs is a bank that is independent from political influence, that's truly neutral. I think that every central bank in the world is already has a mandate, or is giving itself a mandate that expands to a social agenda, and is not purely focused on creating good money. And so I think that where Maker could truly separate itself is just being focused on providing the best money possible and not also being a public utility. That might be my vision alone, and that's fine. So I'm just putting it out there. Finally, I would say I think that some of the work that we have done in the past of appraising individual borrowers is probably not the most scalable. I think I'm more in favor of creating frameworks that can scale for us to focus on like really high value individual customers and lending to protocols. So I think the way that I see it is Maker shouldn't be the one, be the source of where people borrow directly, but rather we are a place for other banks to borrow and other protocols, and then they end up sort of dispersing that credit into the wider crypto economy and eventually the wider economy in general. So I think that the direct deposit modules have been one of the biggest success stories in DeFi period. I think I would like to see them utilized and expanded to a lot more protocols, and eventually also I think to many other blockchains. So I think that actually that's the end of my presentation. So yeah, I'm hoping to get a lot of questions and a good discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing and for putting that together. Cool. Went back to just the waiting room view here while we field questions. Start with an open call. Anything anyone wants to ask? I see a hand raised from C here. Go for it.
Hi, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Okay. Yeah, so first of all, I completely agree with what you said about focusing on growth as opposed to being a public utility. I think it makes a lot of sense to me, especially if you look at traditional growth companies. I mean, it would make no sense to be paying dividends when you could focus on achieving growth. So first of all, I think that makes perfect sense. I have two questions, if that's okay. So the first one would be, you mentioned initially one of the gripes you had with strategy has been like the movement towards real world assets. So I was interested to hear your thoughts on that. And then secondly, when you mentioned the notion of focusing on high value customers and potentially like being the bank for banks, would that entail contract to contract lending, perhaps under or uncollateralized lending? Kind of what are your thoughts with respect to how that would look? Thank you.
Hey, thanks for your questions. Yeah, so I think Maker had a pivotal point in the past where there was a question if DAI, like how to scale DAI, right? Because DAI was consistently being above peg. And so the question was really, how can we either sort of disincentivize borrowing or make it, or sort of disincentivize holding and incentivize borrowing, or should we just try to focus on the borrowing side via reward? But can we expand sort of the range of collateral that people want to borrow against fast enough? And I think the answer, at least before the invention of the direct deposit module, I think the only answer that Maker had to this was, yeah, let's get into real world assets. I think the most elegant and most scalable solution would have been the implementation of negative interest rates. I've written about that quite a bit in the past. So I was a bit sad to see that sort of this was decided against, and especially with the rollout of real world assets actually being so slow that the only actual solution was just putting a ton of centralized stable coins on our balance sheet. So I think this for the longest time put Maker in between a rock and a hard place where it wasn't as efficient and scalable as the centralized stable coins. But it was also not the preferred choice for someone seeking an actually decentralized form of collateral. So I think that by doing that, Maker kind of gave up its unique market position. I was very surprised to see it scale, or you get the kind of adoption that it did. So I think that, yeah, I think actually, I'm totally fine with the decisions that have been taken in hindsight. Just pointing out why I thought at the time that was a wrong choice, and I would have made a different decision. And well, to your second question, I'm not sure. I mean, I think I would leave this to the core units to figure out how to structure the deals with high value customers. And the direct deposit module, I think, is something that has been proven to be very effective. But I think also our deals with, I think, is it Nexo and like one and Celsius, I think they're two of the 5 largest vaults. I think there's a lot more that we can do in this regard, including under collateralized loans. I think in general, any form of business that we can do carries a certain amount of risk, and not doing it also carries a certain amount of risk. And I feel like this inaction is generally something that is my sense that it's something that's sort of underappreciated in the Maker community. Also with regards to growth, right? So we always like to pretend that we take a risk-free approach to things. But then all of a sudden there's a project like Abracadabra, and they get to like 5 billion MIM within like 2 months, right? And we are super surprised, like how is this possible? And the reason is simply that like we can tell ourselves where we don't, like we are taking a risk-free approach by not going to these other chains and not expanding the collateral that we accept, etc. But in reality, we just open up ourselves up to a different kind of risk, which is a business risk, that we leave supply in the market untapped, and we create this this unfilled demand that somebody else can go into and compete with us. And so I think what's missing is like more of a holistic way of thinking about risk. and not saying, oh yeah, we are all about minimizing technical risk, but then at the end of the day, we leave ourselves open to business risk and get outcompeted.
Thanks for that reflection. Yeah. Cool. I got Kevin up next in our queue. If you want to ask your question, Kevin.
Hey, yeah, thank you very much for taking the time and really excited about this. I guess to follow up on the question about real world lending, I mean, you mentioned a little bit about Celsius and Nexo, which are, I mean, kind of still within the crypto ecosystem, obviously with centrifuge and kind of some of the initial things that have been, you know, happening on the asset-backed finance and in terms of asset-backed, like real world non-crypto assets. Like, I'm curious to just kind of get your opinion on whether or not you think that's the right direction for Maker to go to diversify its treasury, or if you think, you know, perhaps there's other, you know, it's not worth it. I'm just pretty open-ended question. Just curious to get your thoughts.
I think for diversifying the treasury, I'm definitely in favor of diversifying our USD exposure. Basically, if there's something we can do, I would be curious to explore it. I mean, in general, if something happens to USDC, then I think the crypto space is probably in a very bad place anyway. I'm always like willing to take some risks. I think USDC is a risk that I don't see as particularly strong or dangerous to Maker at this point. Whether sort of with regards to expanding into real world assets, I must say this is something I don't have much experience in. I would rather defer to other delegates here and also to real world asset core unit with making this decision. So yeah, I would say my area of expertise is more within sort of treasury management and hopefully finding a way to make better decisions at Maker, not at this point in sort of the area of real world assets.
Awesome, thank you.
Cool. Thank you for the question. Next up on our list, I believe we have funny random username as a question.
Hey, thanks. Hasu, I kind of caught sort of mid to the end of the presentation, and you've sort of touched on it a few times here, and that's things like, you know, the treasury management side of things. And maybe you put this under partnerships, maybe you don't, but I wanted to get your position on DAO treasury swaps. And, you know, if that's something that you've sort of contemplated for this, or just your general opinion with regards to DAO treasury swaps.
Yeah, so by treasury swaps, you mean Maker selling MKR or swapping it with to acquire basically the governance token of another crypto project?
Yes.
I think in general this can make sense when you want to develop a really strong partnership between two protocols. I'm not sure between which protocols that would make sense today. I mean, one that I can think of would be Lido. Lido, the originator of staked ETH, which is already supported in Maker. And I mean, my personal thesis is that staked ETH will probably replace ETH entirely over the next 10 years, if all goes according to plan. So I think if Maker can position itself to be the place where you can get the cheapest leverage on your staked ETH, I think that's probably a potential partnership. But full disclosure, I'm also an investor in Lido. So yeah, don't just count on my words here. Apart from that, I don't really see any opportunities for Maker to do any treasury swaps at this point. Curious if you think I'm missing anything.
No, not particularly. I just think it's a potentially interesting mechanism going forward in terms of A, partnerships, but B, in terms of diversifying treasury holdings. So having, you know, a percentage allocated to swaps, and that may be a potential way of diversifying the treasury. But like you say though, there's got to be things that come with that. It's, you know, the swap is one thing, but things like cliffing, vesting, all those things need to be, you know, thoroughly thought through, and you know, strong agreements in place.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for diversification, all of crypto is so correlated at this point that I don't see a lot of diversification effect from it. If that changes, then yeah, I think that's probably another story. For now, I only think it makes sense if you want to, if two projects really want to develop a close relationship with each other, and then you can do a treasury swap as a part of that.
Cool, thank you.
Awesome. Really appreciate all these questions. We have Mariano next up on the list.
Hi, Hasu. Thank you for your presentation. I have two questions. One is, what would you say is the main maker product, bolts or DAI, and what do you think we should focus to communicate and push? That is one. And the second one is, what do you think about maker going to L2s and potentially other L1s, right? With that opportunity, you still see maker as the banks of banks or also as the banks for end users? Thank you.
Hey, Mariano, thanks for your question. So I think that Maker cannot just focus on one product. I think Maker is a two-sided marketplace between borrowers and holders of DAI. You can also look at it as like a long and a short side, and DAI being, yeah, basically like a perpetual. So I think it always has to develop both sides, right? So if Maker were to focus only on developing demand for DAI, as arguably it has done for the last 1 to 2 years, then what you get is that you have excess demand for DAI, and DAI is constantly above the pack. And then you have to make very hard decisions, such as backing or putting a lot of centralized stablecoins on your balance sheet in order to protect the pack. And this can make your product unstable and potentially even kill it in the long run. So, on the other hand, if you focused only on borrowing demand and nobody wanted to hold the coin, then you can have the other problem. And you can have a DAI that's consistently below the pack, although that is arguably is a better problem to have, because you can use the DAI savings rate in order to boost the profitability of holding DAI as a transfer from borrowers to holders. But you cannot actually do the opposite. So we cannot charge holders of DAI in order to incentivize more borrowing. And arguably that is a structural problem that makes DAI and Maker less scalable, that I would have liked to fix a few years ago, but alas, we did not. So I think we really have to make sure that we prioritize both at the same time, both borrowing and lending. And so today, the number of stablecoins on our balance sheet is a great indicator for the imbalance between the two. So looking at how much DAI is backed by USDC, and we can really tell that there is much more demand to hold DAI than to borrow it. And so I think for the next year, we should really focus on boosting the borrowing demand in order to replace more USDC with other forms of collateral. So that's the first question. And the second, I think, was to what I think about expanding to layer 1 and layer 2, right? Yeah, so I kind of answered that a short while ago already. So I'm very much in favor of expanding to other blockchains. For one, I'm a strong believer in a multi-chain thesis for crypto. I think there will be a lot of blockchains that are going to flourish in the future. And I think their risk is greatly overemphasized. I think they will all stick around. They will not be shut down by regulators or anything like that. And as I said, it's not like Maker is not taking any risk by not going to these chains, right? So it minimizes the risk of sort of DAI on another chain becoming unbacked, but it gains the risk of leaving the market open to a competitor. And arguably, Abracadabra was a very amateurish attempt at competing with Maker in these regards. I think there could definitely be a competitor that doesn't blow up from its own incompetence, and all of a sudden Maker finds itself on the back foot. So that's something that I would really like to prevent. I think there is a lot of borrowing demand on these other chains, and this could solve the problem introduced by, or that was addressed in your previous question as well, which is there really isn't enough borrowing demand, but there is a ton of borrowing demand on these other chains. And so I would definitely like to see Maker go on these chains, and we can still run. So the way that I look at it is like every new chain that we expand to is basically just a CDP, right? So we can run our own risk parameters on it and slowly increase the debt ceilings as we become more comfortable with the security parameters of their chain. And yeah, I think I would definitely be in favor of seeing more multi-chain expansion here.
Thank you.
I think Jen is next up for questions.
Yes. Hey, Hasu, thanks for being here, and also a fan of Uncommon Core, looking for that next episode for you guys to release. So my question is related to your concepts of the executive delegates. And I'm just curious, how you see that framework in practice. So just as context, I work on the growth core unit, and I used to be at the foundation. So I went from the foundation structure to this, decentralized core unit structure. So, I'm not opposed to this concept of an executive delegate kind of layer, but my immediate thought would be how does this avoid, like you said, privileged operators? Because it feels very hierarchical and centralized, where you would have executive delegates who would be overseeing the actual core units, and then the being involved in strategic decision making, all on the behalf of the Maker token holders. But on paper, that sounds very much like the foundation to me, more or less. So I'm just curious, how you see it in practice and what problem it's ultimately trying to solve.
Hey, thanks for your question. So the problem that I think that it's trying to solve is that if you have a hierarchy that is too flat, I think you end up with very few people actually. So, the reality is that very few holders actually participate in governance. And the ones that do, I think they don't all pull in the same direction. I think it's almost like every year we have a different focus, and there isn't really a long-term plan that is being executed on. And so I think it's almost of secondary importance what the plan is. I think it's more important that there is someone who sets a plan, and everybody focuses their resources in the same direction. And so that is kind of what I would hope to achieve by having someone, almost anyone, set a consistent vision and minimize sort of resources spent on anything else. I would say how this can be implemented is still totally TBD. I just have a sense that we need a bit more structure in setting the agenda. And yeah, you raise very good points, clearly, with how to minimize privileged control and information. I think we would need very strong reporting to MKR holders. Definitely the ability to remove these delegates at any time if users think that they no longer operate in the best interest. Overall, I think just you need a very strong system of checks and balances. So nobody should have unilateral control. Everybody should be accountable to someone else in sort of a web of accountability. That's all I can really say about that right now. I just have seen other DAOs where if the hierarchy gets too flat, then I think the result is basically that nobody is incentivized to think really long-term on behalf of the protocol, and a lot of forces start to pull into very different directions, and you end up diluting yourselves, and spreading yourself too thin, when really you should be focusing all your time and pushing in one direction. I hope to do more research on this and also hopefully provide some case studies for what works in other protocols. But really, I think Maker is as usual kind of at the forefront here of trying something new in governance. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks to Jen and Hasu for answering. Next up, we did have Clifton, I believe.
Hey, how's it going? So I was wondering, like if you have thoughts on kind of like state of research of like doing like more of like a cross collateralization of the stable coins, kind of like a true multi-collateral. Something that more emulate, kind of like almost like a prime brokerage or something like that. Is that something that Maker's looking at as far as like product wise goes? I mean, I basically had that question. Obviously, like I think like kind of like think of it like something like that, like if it's execution heavy, like that could be like a cool like layer 2 StarkX type thing. Had that question.
Well, what do you mean by cross collateralization of stable coins?
I mean cross collateralization of the collateral itself that you'd be borrowing against. I mean, like while things are like highly correlated, like you talked about earlier, maybe this sort of thing matters a bit less, but as there's more of a dispersion in those correlations, that it's much more capital efficient, essentially, to basically have a pool of assets that you borrow against.
So a vault that supports more than one asset, basically.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, basically, that's how Compound, Aave, etc. work, right? So you can provide different kinds of collateral, and it's all counted towards your balance, and then you can borrow against it. I think it would be interesting for Maker to do some research how important this feature is to borrowers. Personally, I'm not. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, with CDP-based systems, you could do things obviously like the interest rates are just kind of constructed. They're not not completely necessarily like a market-based rates, since you're creating the stable coins out of thin air. So I think that's like one of the reasons why like Abracadabra or something like shot up in popularity, is because you could basically borrow at like close to zero. I guess liquidity, like same thing. And that if you basically just encourage collateral that collects interest, you could just take a cut of the basically like a cut of the interest bearing collateral as those balances change, rather than basically making it very cheap for people to borrow, but also having that other revenue source. And so there's like, I think there's like some different, anyway.
Well, if it's about if we are talking just about cross collateral or multi collateral vaults, I would also point out that due to the direct deposit module, you can already put multiple forms of collateral inside these other lending markets, and then benefit from the same interest rate as you would in Maker, right, via the direct deposit module. So I don't really think it's necessary at this point, but I like the general direction of focusing and bootstrapping more of the borrowing side compared to the DAI holding side. So yeah.
Well, thanks.
Wonderful. I'm going to kick it to Nadia.
Hey, Hasu. So I have a question about core units, because right now we have been in the last months, we have been discussing a lot about the new core units that we could have on the DAO. And I think this is something that you will be voting in the following weeks. And it's what do you think about core units? Like, how many core units does the DAO need? Because I understand that you want to grow the protocol. To grow the protocol, you will need to increase the workforce. But does that mean that we need to onboard new core units? Like, it doesn't matter what core unit we need to have 100 core units in the next 2 years, or should we be more strategic and maybe have like a wish list of core units that the DAO needs and try to create those core units. So yeah, I'm curious about how to scale the DAO on number of core units, and also do we need like different core units doing the same thing at this stage, or that is something for the future? Because like the original vision of it is like as a decentralized organization, we need more than one core unit doing the same thing, because we don't want to centralize the power just in one group. So I'm curious about what you think about it.
Hey, Nadja, thanks for your questions. So I don't even know how many core units there are. I think this is, I think it's very hard to really manage the budget of a DAO well already at this size, unless you are a full-time delegate. And I think this goes back to this idea of, Maker not really incentivizing or incentive aligning, the right kind of full-time delegate. So, I mean, the work that the delegates do right now, and I've seen now some of it from the inside, since I became one myself, just watching, how the sort of the workload that the existing delegates do. And I think given the current level of incentivization, it's actually crazy. So I don't know how you're supposed to make these decisions without being a full-time delegate. So I think this for me would be, an argument in favor of having, a little more centralized control at this layer, basically at the layer of making financial decisions with the DAO money, and who should the CUs be, how many do we need, and what is their budget, and how do we hold them accountable. So I think this, basically in a nutshell, I think this is impossible for the current set of CUs to decide, and it will become even harder over time as we grow further. So I can't tell you if we need all of the CUs that we onboarded in the last 6 months or that are currently being voted on. And I don't know how I would get a sense of it, because I think the time required to think through all of this is just way too big. So that's the first part. I think, do we need different CUs doing the same thing? I think it depends. I think it depends on the work that the CU is doing. I think really the only place where it could make sense is maybe, core engineering. I think they are probably the oldest CU, right? And probably sort of the most important one. And in order to avoid, political centralization and one core unit gaining too much control, this may be the first thing that I would look at. But also in the sense that there are many things that we want to do at the same time. So, for example, work being done on different domains versus new vault types, etc. So this is probably the area where I think it would make most sense to create a bit more modularity in the core units. For the others, I think that the work is probably not business critical enough that I would advocate for, more than one CU doing the same thing right now. But I should say that really, this is all kind of half speculative on my part, right? I mean, there have been people in here that have been working in Maker for years and know all of the, existing power structure, and the problems with different CUs and their relationship, etc. So I don't even, give myself the illusion that I can make a really informed decision about this. So really just trying to answer the question that's being thrown to me, but I have no strong confidence on this topic.
Appreciate that reflections there, and I think we're at the end of our speakers list with MakerMan here, so take it away.
Thank you, Payton. Can you guys hear me?
I'm clear.
Okay, good. Hasu, I wanted to welcome you and thank you for showing up and coming through and mentioning me in your intro. I was surprised. I can't thank you enough for hearing someone else talk about a treasury. I've been doing this for years now. and thinking about how, maker backing the protocol is almost guaranteed to sell low and buy high by a flat flop mechanic. So I look forward to seeing some discussion on that. One point you talked about negative interest rates and creating new value, as well as encouraging growth. And I definitely have a few ideas on how we can do that are not the run of the mill. I also chuckled when you said the whole 5 to 10% backing here, that I think I was pushing for 2 to 5% surplus buffer, and I was just talked down so fast it didn't make a difference. And so, it's interesting to see, and I'm happy to see another player here that's thinking about this and looking at growing the protocol, because every time I looked at a collateral type, I was like, oh, well, when we had 100 million out of DAI out and we had like a 1 million surplus buffer, I'm like, well, I guess we could risk 1 million. So you think about every deal you do and every collateral type you add and DC you add, you think about it against what's the surplus here, right? What's our risk? And the goal was really to move forward. So I'll let you chat here. I'm just going to go through because I have a list and I have to get out of here soon. And I want to hear you. So I want to say something. Generally, running negative interest rates in the ways it was presented was not well received by governance. And so I think we can address it, but I generally, governance was reluctant to do that. You talk about wanting to address governance issues and having an executive team. I look forward to that. I think it'll be interesting and challenging. Your web of accountability is also interesting. And I'm going to point out something. My own analysis suggests DAO expenses to perform similar functions to companies, or at least 2 to 3 times. It'll be interesting to hear what thoughts you have on this. And the reason is just redundancy and quality assurance. And I can give you an example. Like we can look at RWF and RWA here. You really don't want your steel sourcers to also be your team doing the reviewing on the assessments. You really would like those to be firewalled options. And so it's going to kind of make that more expensive. There's other things you might want to duplicate. I look forward to discussions. And so my question is like, what do you think about the CU expense ramp compared to revenue, the trend here? So that's my question for you. You can write that down. And we can talk more about cross-platform swaps. I'm in the middle of a couple of these right now, and they are kind of non-trivial. And there's a lot of different ways and different things that you can do. And so it's an interesting topic of discussion. We don't have to address it now. And then your last point is under collateralized loans. I think it's interesting to discuss. But I think we should be looking at bigger players and trying to get some bigger stuff going on. I think it's an interesting place to look. I think governance is going to have a hard time dealing with it. And so I want to thank you again. And if you could address my question on the CU expense ramp compared to revenues, that would be great. Thanks.
Thank you for these comments. I look forward to working with you on hopefully materializing some of these plans. I actually haven't seen the CU expense rate chart versus revenue. So yeah, I will have to catch up to that and then get back to you later. I mean, obviously, I think the two have to be, compared to each other, and you cannot decide on expenses without projecting what kind of revenue it generates in the future. My general approach has been to, think of creating onboarding a new CU as an investment for the DAO. I think this has been my approach to treasury management in general, and that's why I think we need a holistic framework. Every dollar you spend, I think as a DAO, you need a sense of how much revenue it can generate you in the future. And really any decision can be viewed under this lens, whether it's borrowing money or it's buying back tokens and canceling them, or it's creating a new CU and paying them a budget. Or if it's paying incentives on a new chain in order to bootstrap liquidity there. So I really would like to see a holistic framework for thinking about these things. I think it's without that, the decisions that the delegates need to make, I think they will spiral way out of control. So that would be sort of my cop-out answer, and I will get back to you on the other questions.
Excellent. I think we're going to try and squeeze one more here. Is it Jack by chance?
Yeah, thank you so much. Hi, Hasu, Jakub here from Z Prime. I would be curious what you think about in terms of treasury management, accumulating some ETH or maybe even stake ETH. I saw it in the forum, but there was like really like unclear consensus, let's say, within the community. There was some like other ideas like how to offset Oracle's costs, like via some like call options on ETH, which I think is like very inelegant or not very elegant solution, and like incurring like too much work and other hassle with it. While also I was thinking if ETH cannot be better asset for redeemability in terms of if DAI is above peg instead of USDC, because all the time when I'm speaking to other funds and other big guys who really care about like decentralization, USDC or like half of the maker balance sheet in USDC is for them like big no or like against this like spirit of decentralization. Thanks.
Hey, Jacob. Okay, that was a bunch of questions. I think which was the actually I forgot what the
sorry. So just accumulating ETH or stake ETH and like trying to like pull out USDC from the balance sheet and maybe have some like internal market for ETH. So all the time when DAI will be above 1, there will be like arbitrage opportunity to have this like cheaper ETH and then sell it elsewhere. Thanks.
Yeah, I think I mean, so if you were to sell the USDC from the balance sheet in favor of ETH, then I mean, I think that's for obvious reasons not a good idea, because when ETH goes down, then you're already under collateralized. So I think it's not good to back DAI. If we are talking about the actual treasury,
surplus buffer. Sorry, not from
surplus.
the US, but from surplus.
Yeah, for surplus buffer, I'm a little more indifferent. I think in general, I would probably be in favor of holding all treasury and stable coins, but it's a bit of a double-edged sword in general, because if you look at, I mean, sometimes what happens in crypto is that the company that's willing to take the most risk, if the risk doesn't materialize, then obviously you're in a very good spot. So there have been many projects who have held a lot of crypto in their treasury, and then the crypto went way up and they got into a very dominant position, right? So Gnosis, for example. So that's not the approach that I would have taken, but sort of it did end up paying off. And then it's very hard to compete as a project who arguably did the more sensible thing and had only stable coins and focused on building their core product, and did not also make a price bet on crypto. So I don't know, what's best here. So can you repeat your final question?
No, because I don't want to stretch more time than we.
Okay. Yeah, but feel free to send it to me on Telegram.
Yeah, I would super encourage anyone, if you have questions left over, like please hit the Maker forum. That's a great place to kind of organize questions about delegates, as well as other things MakerDAO. Huge thanks to Hasu for hosting, and we appreciate everyone for letting us go a little over today so we could field all the questions that came in. As a reminder, this will be posted on YouTube, and shortly after this call, we'll be taking care of the technical backend stuff for getting Hasu up on the voting portal as a recognized delegate. So thank you again to everyone who attended. Please continue the conversations in the forums, and we'll catch you at the next one.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming.